5:30, we have a workshop, I believe, is that correct, Madam McGuire? 5:30, okay, perfect. So we'll go ahead and begin. Workshop for the purpose of discussing the results of a feasibility study for an Ag Innovation Center concept. Ophelia, is that you?
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. Thank you for giving us the opportunity this evening to provide you with an update on the grant you approved for our department to receive last year. Just a brief background on this incubator feasibility study from notes that I was able to locate. A steering committee was organized by city staff July 1st, 2019. With their last meeting held November 14, 2019, the steering committee included Fiber Guide, University of Idaho, College of Idaho, Treasure Valley Community College, Idaho SBDC, New Venture Labs, Ripley Dorn and Company, Johnson Thermal Systems, CWI, Boise State, and Destination Caldwell. This steering committee obviously was before my time. There was a pause due to COVID. And so we fast forward to 2024. This Economic Development Department was awarded a grant via Capital Matrix for $25,000 for this feasibility study for this project. Points Consulting is an independent Idaho firm that was selected for this study. They have completed their findings. They completed the findings in the fall. And this evening, I would like to introduce you to Brian Points, president at Points Consulting, who will share the results of that finding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. And I believe we've got a slide deck that's going to get queued up here. Okay, great, thank you. So I've been asked to condense this into 15 minutes and then allow some time for Q&A. So keep in mind that the slides that we originally delivered for this were 58. So roughly 60 of them. So if there's more information that you're wondering about, any of the background research that went into this, that information is available. If you don't have those slides, Stephen has those slides for you. First off, I just want to address the question of what is Innovation Hub, or sometimes called a business incubator. There's some similarities between those concepts. To put it in a nutshell and keep it super simple, you think about an incubator for a baby, right? It's there to keep it alive while it's in infancy until it's more self-sustaining and can kind of breathe and thrive on its own. A business incubator is a similar type of concept for private sector businesses, right? So you're keeping the rental price lower, you're providing them with programs on entrepreneurship and networking and sometimes connecting with financing opportunities so that those businesses can become self-sustaining and eventually move out. The point isn't to stay in that facility forever, it's to move out of that facility and occupy other space that's going to allow them to produce more jobs, more tax revenue, more economic impact for the community. So just want to address that question first and foremost. Second question you probably have is, well, this is a feasibility study, so you're here, so I'm here to tell you whether you should do it or not, right? Well, we'll get to that in about 10 minutes, but the answer is, it is, but it depends on how much the city would want to spend on that to sustain it, because it's not going to, it would need some form of public support to be feasible, right? It's not going to completely cover its costs according to our analysis. So we'll get into the weeds on that shortly. Next slide, please. Don't need to belabor this a bit, but just so you know a bit about who we are, we're based in Moscow, Idaho. We do work coast to coast. Here's an example of some of the projects that we've done in Idaho and sort of adjacent areas, and a view of our team on the left. Those are most of our team members and then a few of our frequent collaborators. One of the studies that's most similar to this, just as an FYI, is we did it's about in the middle of that list for the University of Idaho, the Center for Agriculture, Food, and the Environment. We did a feasibility study for the U of I on that front in 2023. And a lot of commonality, similarity of methodology, that type of thing. Next slide, please. So this is what we were asked to do, the two primary research questions. Is there enough demand for this that it would warrant doing it? And number two, if you do that, how do you make it successful? So what are the best practices? How do you set up the variables to produce success? Next slide, please. And this is the full table of contents for the full 60-page slide deck. I reshuffled the deck a bit from what we delivered in October of last year, so we can condense it down to this 15 minutes, but this is all of the content if you so choose to digest that. I will also point out that some of the statistics that we pulled are as of October, as of September of 2024. To keep the cost down so that we wouldn't have to put more research time and labor hours into this, we just elected to say, you know, that's close enough to current market conditions, and we're just gonna present this as is. So if you're wondering, well, why is this out of date? That's the reason. We kind of closed the book on this in September of last year. Next slide, please. So here are our options ultimately that we arrived at. 3 facility sizes: large, medium, small. You see the rough square footage there. Those are very rough. You could go a little higher, a little lower. I think one of the comps that we found on the rough or the large size was closer to 25,000 square feet. And we're going to go over what does that mean in terms of revenues and in terms of costs. Those things are not perfectly linear, and in terms of how much surplus or loss for each of those different facility types. Next slide, please. Local vacancy rates. We looked at a number of different commercial and industrial market statistics. These data are from TOK, who puts out these great quarterly and monthly market snapshots of the Treasure Valley, and they break it out by these different jurisdictions. So the first thing before we really went into any further detail with this that I wanted to know is, does it make sense from the outset, right? If you have a huge surplus of a lot of industrial and commercial space, you don't really need an incubator because you got a lot of inventory that needs to be eaten up, right? That does not appear to be the case in Caldwell. Vacancy is a very simple statistic. It's basically just how much square footage is not being used of the total square footage that's available. Okay, so you're in a very average range for office, and then for industrial, it's very low. And you can see the comparisons to some of the other areas and counties in the vicinity. An additional statistic that doesn't show up on this chart, but that we received from interactions with commercial realtors, is that there's looking at those gross numbers, and then there's looking at the sizes of the options that are available. So they said pointedly that when we're looking at Caldwell, the small stuff really doesn't exist. All right, so maybe you do have some vacancy, but when you're talking about something that's less than 1,500 square feet for an office or for something rentable, it really doesn't exist. So that was a sign for us, okay, there's something here that, you know, there's potentially an opportunity at the outset. Next slide. So this is the first slide on earned revenue and how you would make money, right? So we kind of talked about this would require some public support, but it's not going to be completely publicly supported. It's also not going to be completely privately self-sustaining. So it's a blend of both of those things. If you look at these small, medium, and large building sizes, there's some different components of this that would produce revenue. The first one would be large commercial offices. So, you know, by large, we mean in that 1,500 square foot kind of range. Small businesses like mine, when you got, you know, 5 to 8 people, maybe sometimes people are in the office, sometimes they're not. It's kind of the perfect range you're shooting for. You don't necessarily want to buy a building when you're that size, but you can certainly justify leasing something. And then you've got the single private offices. If anybody's ever been to like a co-working space type of concept, these are those, sometimes they're called zoo cages, you know, 60 square feet. It's a lot to just have kind of some privacy glass. If you're somebody who's on Zoom or on the phone a lot, people are willing to pay a premium for that. And then you have the general co-working space. And then lastly, you have event and conference room rentals. Also appears to be a shortage of that in the Caldwell area. If you're in a really small size of the building, you won't really have enough extra space that you can lease out, but if you're on the larger side, you would. So there's your revenue ranges for what you could earn from facility rental. Low end, 28,000, high end, 124,000 annually. Next slide, please. There's other sources of revenue that we could expect to see there. So you see the same things reflected under the earned income section, that first box at the top. Other sources you could go to for revenue would be things like Idaho Commerce, USDA, Economic Development Administration, and then a whole host of private grant-making organizations, Laura Moore Cunningham, you know, Micron Foundation, things like that. Not necessarily easy to get those monies. It's competitive, but if you're going to do it, you're going to need it. And you can see why here when you add up those numbers. And then we have City of Caldwell funding on there, not signing you guys up for anything without your permission. Just saying it's going to take some level of commitment if it would make sense at all. So you total that up, and on the low end, $244-ish thousand in total income, 474 on the high end. Next slide. So what happens, we got to go over expenses first. We look at revenue, then we look at what it costs to actually operate the facility. Government works the same way as business does. It's got to pencil out, right? So the biggest component here is staff. That's at the top. The top box is there, employees, fringe benefits, payroll taxes, all those things. You do have to staff the place. We'll go into that in a bit more detail later on, but it's tempting to look at this and be like, oh, it would make a lot more sense if we didn't have somebody there. Well, then it's not an incubator. Then it's just a place where people go to rent office space. And then your general things that go along with that, utilities, facility care, marketing, et cetera, et cetera. We do our best when putting together a pro forma like this to use local comps to the extent that we can. So, you know, looking at local utility rates and things in insurance rates and things of that nature. That said, this is all somewhat generic as pro formas tend to be. I didn't get 5 quotes from insurance agents because there's no building to get a quote from, right? All that's subject to the specifics of the actual deal on the property. So you see the totals at the bottom there. Next slide, please. And you put that all together into this model and you look at your net profit and your cash flow. If you're somebody who's really into public finance and things like depreciation, you can look at all the details in the weeds here. I won't go into all of that. Basically, excuse me. Well, one important thing to point out here is that it will require a loan of some sort, right? So we made some assumptions on that. You can see the details of that. Over a 25-year loan, at the time, 7% was a pretty reasonable approximation. We'll get into what some of the costs would be for different building options in one of the next slides, but that's what all that information means on the principal and that kind of thing. So at the end of the day, the only one that would actually produce some level of operating surplus would be the small building option, right? So even assuming those subsidies and those grants and that public support, you're just getting a little over $15,000 per year. The point's not to make money though, right? The point is to help businesses thrive and entrepreneurship grow. Medium building, you lose some money. Large building, you lose a little bit more money. So just wanted to be honest about, you know, how it pencils out. The medium and large buildings are a little bit hard to justify unless you think you can rally up more support and more funding. Next slide, please. Building acquisition and development estimates. So for these different sizes that we talked about earlier, these are the rough costs, and here's kind of what goes into that. So there's building costs, there's land costs, there's soft costs, there's renovation costs, there's FFE, or furniture, fixtures, and equipment. Sometimes people look at that line and think, wow, that's really expensive. But again, you can't, you know, presumably you're going to want tile, right, and light fixtures and those kinds of things, and those things cost money. So trying to give you the best reasonable approximation that you can, but people can always find a way to get better deals. So there's different ways you can do that. You can find something that maybe somebody's willing to donate. You can find land that you already own, and then you can knock off the costs. You can find any number of other options that might shift the economics that we show here. The beautiful thing about pro formas is that it's all math, right? When we got a spreadsheet, I'll give that spreadsheet to Stephen. If he ever ends up in a situation where he's like, oh, we found a spot and the land's going to be $10,000, right? Plug that in, see how it pencils out. Next slide, please. A little bit more on those options, and those pictures at the bottom, I think those, yeah, I know that at least some of those are actual local options that were on the market at the time. Again, some of those have changed, are no longer for lease and no longer for sale. But just an example of some of the things we looked at so we could get some reasonable numbers here. So for those different building sizes, here's your kind of all-in costs, which is the same number that was on the previous slide, and then your estimated monthly commercial loan. So for a small building, one of the benefits of that is that's a pretty small loan, all things considered, $1,800 a month, but $7,600 a month for a large building is quite a bit more expensive. Next slide, please. So our recommendation, if you are going to do it, if you do have a stomach for giving a little bit of support, and then the city, grant writers finding more support from elsewhere, the small incubator option probably makes the most sense. Really, in an ideal world, it'd be great to start small and then flex into something bigger if it's successful, but sometimes in practicality, it's hard to find a building like that. Next slide, please. Also, potential partnerships, we can't leave this out. Most incubators, when you do your homework on how they function, and we've read lots of white papers on this topic, there's the university connection is very often there. I can't remember the exact number. I feel like it's like 50–60% of the time with incubators, that's part of it. And you can see that, right? Because they're about talent, they're about generating innovation and good ideas, right? So if there's a way that you can partner with any of these institutions, that is great. The existing Caldwell Research and Extension Center, as an example, which we have a picture of here, this is one of those parallels that could make a lot of sense. We had some really preliminary conversations with them about it that you all could easily, or Stephen's department can easily pick up on, and there's some land right behind that that would be attractive in a lot of ways. Next slide, please. And this is the one where we're kind of boiling down like 15 or 20 slides into one. This is a new one that I added yesterday because I felt like there wasn't any way that I could march you through 20 slides without something like this. But in terms of operations, we've talked a lot about the dollars and cents. Now let's talk a bit about the operations. What you have to understand is that you need to have a good strategy if this is going to be pulled off. You can't just say we're taking any kind of business and they can stay here as long as they want. That's not a successful strategy. It's not going to produce an economic impact. Basically, you're just giving people cheap rent in perpetuity. In some places, call themselves an incubator and do this. It's not really the way that it should be done. Because you think about it, you're helping a small number of businesses and then they just stay there forever, right? You're not graduating them out so you can produce that space that's below market rate so that others can come in and grow their businesses too. You need that. That building design needs to match the strategy as well. So through conversations with Stephen and conversations with Ophelia and the folks that they've talked to locally, we feel like some form of ag focus makes a lot of sense for the Caldwell community. That would mean you don't really want something that's downtown, probably, right? Unless it's a really special case, because you're going to need something that has a loading dock, right? If you're going to make stuff out of raw materials, you need to ship stuff in and you need to ship stuff out. So that would be logistically difficult. You're also paying a lot more than you'd need to per square foot when you need a lot of warehouse space. So something more like what you sometimes call flex space in the commercial real estate world is a better fit. So think of it as those bays, kind of like the U of I Extension Center. You got a bay 1,500, a bay of maybe 800 square feet, a bay of 2,500 square feet. People can rent those individually. You can move stuff in, you can move it out. It's wide open in the middle, so you can have a little bit of factory space, a little bit of warehouse space, a little bit of office space. That's kind of what makes a lot of sense. The picture here is from Walla Walla, where they've actually established an incubator that's specifically for the wine industry, which is really cool and an interesting concept for you all to study, considering that you have that same industry cluster in your area. So lastly, policies need to match with the strategy, so some other things to consider: what types of businesses, how do you know that they're graduated, right? So when it comes time to have those hard conversations, it's not going to come as a surprise to them. Who's going to be there on site? You can't just expect this thing to work if there's nobody there. Part of the reason that people come to the incubators is not just because it's cheap, but because it's an environment where they get good ideas that helps them stimulate their business, grow their business, right? They want to be with mentors. They want to be with people that are going to help them network, help them grow their business. That's why you need staffing. And in an ideal environment, you also need volunteers who are helping to teach classes and mentor young business owners and things like that. So I'll stop there. Hopefully I got it within about 15 minutes. And happy to answer any questions. And I'm going to grab my water real quick because I've got a little bit of a cold. But I'm ready to answer your questions.
Very good. Great information, by the way. Councilor Studdick.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just surprised, you had the colleges there, but you didn't have any of the ag companies around here like Simplot, Crookham Seed,
Yeah.
you know, those type of entities, R&M Steel.
Yeah.
Why didn't you talk to those folks too?
Just because that slide was focused on higher ed, but you're absolutely right. And if you go back to the expense slide 3 or 4 back, we had a line there for sponsorships, and that's actually exactly who I had in mind. You know, companies
So
like that.
have you talked to those people or you haven't talked to those people?
We were actually asked not to do too much community engagement because of we wanted to keep this as a pretty tight scan. But I know that Stephen and company and their predecessors had conversations with a lot of community members.
Because they would be the big pushers in this as far as cost is concerned. I mean, you know, you look at the Simplot Tech Center over here, I don't know if you remember that or not. They do all kinds of research over there, and Crookham Seed does a lot of research, so
Yeah,
I would think that they'd be major players for you in this thing.
yeah,
So,
I would agree.
okay, thank you.
Councilor Denver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. So the University of Idaho has an incubator center over off of Chicago in Caldwell already. And I think they focus on production. Would this be a different focus, or would it focus on production also?
It could be a furtherance of the same type of concept, because they are, I don't think that they would have any problem admitting this. They don't have tight graduation policies. They don't have particularly strong industry policies. So they just kind of take who comes and then they stick around, right? So I think that somebody could do something similar, but try to grow that out a bit more.
So then do you think the focus would be, I mean, would production more likely go to that existing facility? And would this be much more of like an office-type incubator where, you know, it could be a medical
At the time that
building?
we talked to them, they didn't have any extra space. And I would imagine that's still the case. So, which is again, you know, 0 vacancy is a sign that you might need more. So I would envision it being something like that, but more of it and more programming and, you know, more of these kind of dynamics that we talked about.
Good. Any other questions? So it was great information. Very much appreciate all the time and effort. So I guess, and Steve, I don't know if you want to weigh in or fill you on that. So if the council was to move in that direction, that most likely this small building kind of layout on that, what would be those steps in that regards, or thoughts of like processes if the council wanted to move in that direction? I don't know if you or Steve or
Do you want to take that? I could give my thoughts. Okay.
Yeah, great information, Brian. Thank you so much. It was great to work with Points Consulting just because of their strong ties to the University of Idaho, their familiarity with the Innovation Center concept. It was a breeze to be able to get through this information in a very short span of time. So I would say the next steps for us would be furthering those partnerships that were described earlier. We have a list of entities that partook in the 2019 stakeholder process, or the committee that we established. We also have a list of others that we would like to target, because this is now an ag focus. Originally, it was more of a broad innovation center focus where you can bring an idea of any kind, and we narrowed it down to what was specific to Caldwell as it relates to our history, some of our thriving industries locally, and just felt like ag was something that aligned quite well with what we do, knowing that there's so many different commodities that are grown here in terms of seed farming and whatnot in Canyon County as a whole, having the most farms in the state of Idaho in terms of the counties. We felt like that was just a great alignment here. So I would just say furthering those partnerships, making sure that that was true, and then coming back with an actual plan to be able to fund this thing would be as far as next steps. We were just looking for direction, want to put this in front of you as a result of what was analyzed from the feasibility study perspective, and then getting direction from the council as to how we move forward, if there's a desire to move forward and see this materialize in a small format that was described by Mr. Points.
Excellent. Any additional on that? Points, or?
Nothing else to say on that.
Okay, very good. Other questions? Councilor Stanek?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Jenkins, I would think that if you got the Simplots involved, the Crookens and all the other folks, that we don't even need to approach the taxpayers on this, because they might have enough funds in their foundations to support this thing. And I think they would be more than happy to, along with the universities. So
Yeah.
that would be my opinion, but gosh, especially if you get into the technologies part where you can, train people to, build a beam out of steel or whatever, or have a new potato variety or a sugar beet variety or whatever, I would think they would jump on something like that, so.
Yeah, I believe so, Mayor, Councilor Stodic, and really our goal in economic development is to retain talent in the community. We don't want our ideas going to other communities or other cities outside of Caldwell. So having a facility like this where ideas can be developed and help our industries grow locally is really the goal. We have a list of potential partners that I'll read off to you just real quickly to punctuate the point that you made earlier. But we have DMB, Simplot, Tractor Supply, Crookham Seed Company, Syngenta, Amalgamated Sugar, Zirocco Packaging, Fresca, Shearer Incorporated. But that just lists a few that are here locally in Canyon County as a whole that we can certainly approach with the concept like this, see if there's any interest.
Well, like I say, I think if you got those folks involved, this thing wouldn't cost the taxpayers anything, because I think they would support it wholeheartedly. I know that there's 3 of those companies you mentioned, that the head CEOs are research-minded. I mean, they love research, no matter what, and I think it'd be a good deal if you approached them and got, explained to them what we're trying to do here in this area, and I think they'd really support it 100%.
Right.
Thank you.
For your comments.
Yeah, so I think that would kind of be the next steps is kind of, utilizing this study that's been put together and approach those businesses and or gauge the interest there, and then we could come back and discuss it more after seeing kind of where they stand, if they're on board, and then how can we move forward with these ideas and these concepts.
That'd be great.
So, okay.
Thank you for your
Excellent.
time.
Well, thank you
Appreciate it.
again. Thank you so much for taking the time to come down, be with us. Moscow's a beautiful place up there, so really love that. But thank you again for all of your expertise.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
insight.
Mayor. Thank you, council.
Okay, that wraps up our workshop for this evening, so we're going to conclude that at this time, and we'll be back right around 6 o'clock to begin our regular